Long before Dante dreamed of paradise, an ancient prophet rose beyond the sky. Isaiah climbed through 7 heavens, and what he saw terrified even the angels: the coming of the beloved, and the rise of something darker, the one they called Beliar, the Antichrist. Why have so few heard of this prophecy? And why did some early Christians hide it? We journey into one of history's most mysterious texts, a vision so profound, so disturbing, that it was nearly erased from memory. This is the story of Isaiah's ascension, a tale that predates Christianity's greatest mystical writings by centuries, yet contains prophecies that would reshape how we understand the cosmic battle between good and evil. The prophet Isaiah stands as one of history's most revered figures. Jews, Christians, and Muslims all recognize him as a messenger of divine truth. His prophecies shaped empires, inspired revolutions, and gave birth to messianic hope. But there exists another Isaiah, one whose vision extended far beyond the earthly realm, beyond even the highest heavens most prophets dared to glimpse. This is the Isaiah who witnessed the descent of the Beloved One, who saw the hidden plan of salvation unfold across cosmic dimensions. This is also the Isaiah who beheld the rise of Beliar, the great deceiver, whose coming would herald an age of unprecedented darkness and deception. The text that preserves this vision is called the Ascension of Isaiah, a work so extraordinary that scholars still debate its origins, its authenticity, and its meaning. Written likely in the 1st century of the Christian era, it emerged from a world where the boundaries between Jewish mysticism and early Christian revelation were still fluid, where prophetic visions could reshape entire communities' understanding of their destiny. But this wasn't just another apocalyptic text. The Ascension of Isaiah contained something that made early Christian leaders deeply uncomfortable: a vision of the Antichrist that didn't match their emerging theology. Prophecies that seemed too specific, too terrifying to share with ordinary believers. Some communities embraced it as sacred scripture. Others buried it in monastery libraries, copying it in secret, preserving it for future generations who might be ready for its revelation. What made this vision so dangerous? What did Isaiah see in those 7 heavens that even angels feared to name? The story begins not in the celestial realms, but in the very human world of ancient Israel. Isaiah, already established as a prophet of unmatched authority, found himself in the house of Hezekiah, surrounded by fellow prophets and seekers of divine truth. The historical Isaiah's reputation preceded him. This was the man who had counseled kings, who had proclaimed the coming of a Messiah, who had spoken words that would echo through millennia. But on this particular day, something unprecedented occurred. As Isaiah sat in contemplation, his spirit was suddenly seized by a power beyond anything he had previously experienced. The other prophets watched in amazement as their mentor's body remained motionless while his consciousness began an impossible journey. The text describes this moment with vivid detail. Isaiah's spirit was lifted from his earthly frame, ascending through layers of reality that most humans could never perceive. This wasn't merely a dream or a metaphorical vision. The narrative insists on its literal reality, describing the prophet's physical body becoming lifeless, while his essential being traveled to realms beyond mortal comprehension. The 1st heaven opened before him like a vast doorway made of light itself. Here, Isaiah encountered beings of such radiance that they seemed to be woven from starlight and divine fire. These were angels, but not the familiar cherubim and seraphim of traditional Hebrew prophecy. These were cosmic entities whose very presence spoke of mysteries that transcended earthly understanding. Yet, even as Isaiah marveled at these beings, he sensed something profound. They themselves were reaching towards something higher, something they could only glimpse from their exalted position. The angels of the 1st heaven, despite their glory, were like children, pressing their faces against a window, trying to perceive wonders that lay beyond their grasp. The ascent continued. Each heaven revealed new hierarchies of celestial beings, each more magnificent than the last. In the 2nd heaven, Isaiah met angels whose songs created new stars with each note. In the 3rd, he witnessed beings whose thoughts shaped the very fabric of reality. With each level, the intensity of divine presence grew almost unbearable. Yet Isaiah's spirit was strengthened for the journey ahead. By the fourth heaven, Isaiah began to understand that he was witnessing not just a cosmic hierarchy, but a divine drama that had been unfolding since the foundation of the world. The angels here spoke in whispers about a great mystery, something they called the descent of the Beloved One, a plan so audacious that even the highest celestial beings could barely comprehend it. The fifth heaven revealed angels whose entire existence was devoted to worship so pure that their praise created new dimensions of reality. Here, Isaiah learned that creation itself was but a small part of an infinite tapestry of divine love and cosmic purpose. The angels of this realm possessed knowledge that could transform entire galaxies, yet they too looked upward with longing, aware that even their understanding was limited. In the sixth heaven, Isaiah encountered beings so radiant that his mortal consciousness could barely process their appearance. These were the angels who stood closest to the throne of the Most High, beings whose very existence was a continuous act of worship and service. They had witnessed the creation of time itself, had seen the birth and death of countless worlds, had participated in divine councils that determined the fate of entire universes. Yet, even these magnificent beings, Isaiah realized, were not permitted to see the ultimate mystery. They knew of the Beloved One's planned descent, but the full details remained hidden from them. They spoke of it only in the most reverent terms, acknowledging that what was to come would transform not just the human world, but the very nature of divine-human relationship. As Isaiah approached the seventh heaven, the very air around him seemed to thicken with divine presence. The light became so intense that it transcended visual experience, becoming instead a form of knowledge that penetrated every fiber of his being. Here, at the threshold of the ultimate mystery, Isaiah prepared to witness truths that would shake the foundations of his understanding. The angels who dwelt in the seventh heaven possessed a majesty that defied description. They were beings of such purity and power that their mere presence could reshape reality itself. They had existed since before the creation of the material universe, had participated in divine councils that determined the fundamental laws of existence, had witnessed the emergence of consciousness itself from the primordial void. But even these exalted beings carried a burden of knowledge that Isaiah was only beginning to understand. They knew of the great deception that was to come, the rise of one who would challenge the very foundations of divine order. They spoke of Beliar, the Antichrist, with voices that trembled despite their cosmic authority. In the seventh heaven, Isaiah witnessed the ultimate revelation. Before him appeared the Beloved One, the divine figure who would descend through all the heavens, taking on the appearance of each celestial order as he passed through them, till finally assuming human flesh in the lowest realm of creation. This was no ordinary incarnation. The Beloved One's descent was to be a cosmic deception in the most sublime sense, a divine strategy so perfect that even the princes of this world, the dark spiritual forces that held humanity in bondage, would be unable to recognize their conqueror until it was too late. The Beloved One would pass through each heaven disguised as a being of that realm, his true divine nature hidden from all but the most perceptive eyes. Isaiah watched in awe as the plan unfolded before him. The Beloved One would be born as a human child, live as a mortal man, and die a criminal's death, all while remaining fully divine. This paradox would confound both earthly and celestial powers, creating an opportunity for the liberation of humanity from spiritual bondage. But the vision contained a darker element that made Isaiah's spirit tremble. As the Beloved One prepared for his descent, Isaiah saw the emergence of another figure, one whose rise would parallel the divine mission, but serve opposite purposes. This was Beliar, the great deceiver, the one who would be called the Antichrist. Unlike the popular conceptions of the Antichrist that would later emerge in Christian theology, Isaiah's vision revealed Beliar as a figure of subtle sophistication. He would not arrive as an obvious monster or tyrant, but as a being of apparent wisdom and beauty, capable of deceiving even the most spiritually advanced individuals. Beliar would possess knowledge of both earthly and heavenly realms, using this knowledge to create a counterfeit spirituality that would be almost indistinguishable from authentic divine revelation. The prophecy showed Isaiah how Beliar would infiltrate the very communities that formed around the Beloved One's teaching. He would not attack from outside, but would rise from within, using sacred language and holy symbols to lead believers astray. He would perform signs and wonders that would convince many that he was indeed sent from God, while slowly corrupting the pure teachings of the Beloved One. Isaiah saw how Beliar would particularly target those in positions of religious and political authority. Kings and princes would fall under his influence, not through obvious corruption, but through subtle appeals to their pride and ambition. Religious leaders would be convinced that they were serving God, even as they implemented Beliar's deceptions. The very institutions meant to preserve divine truth would become vehicles for its distortion. The vision showed the coming persecution of those who would recognize Beliar's true nature. These faithful few would be marginalized, persecuted, and ultimately killed for their refusal to accept the false teachings. The prophecy was specific about Isaiah's own fate. He would be sawn in two by those who claimed to serve God, but had actually fallen under Beliar's influence. This martyrdom would not be the end of the story, however. Isaiah saw beyond his own death to the ultimate triumph of the Beloved One. After the period of deception and persecution, the Beloved One would return in glory, accompanied by the armies of heaven. Beliar and his followers would be defeated, not through military might, but through the simple manifestation of divine truth that would make all deception impossible. The resurrection of the righteous would follow, and Isaiah saw himself among those who would be raised to new life. The vision concluded with a glimpse of the transformed creation, a new heaven and new earth, where the knowledge of divine truth would be as common as water in the sea, where deception would be impossible because the very nature of reality would be transparent to all who dwelt within it. As Isaiah's spirit returned to his body, he found himself forever changed by what he had witnessed. The other prophets gathered around him, eager to hear what he had seen. But Isaiah struggled to find words adequate to describe the cosmic drama he had witnessed. How could human language capture the reality of divine beings whose very thoughts created new dimensions of existence? How could he explain the profound paradox of the Beloved One's hidden descent, or the terrifying sophistication of Beliar's deceptions? The text of the Ascension of Isaiah preserves these visions for us, but their history reveals why this prophecy was so troubling to early Christian communities. The vision of the Antichrist was too specific, too disturbing for many believers to accept. Unlike the more symbolic apocalyptic texts that allowed for multiple interpretations, Isaiah's prophecy seemed to describe actual events with uncomfortable precision. Moreover, the text's emphasis on the deception of religious leaders themselves was profoundly challenging to emerging Christian institutions. If Beliar would work primarily through those who claimed divine authority, how could any religious hierarchy be trusted? If the Antichrist would use sacred language and holy symbols to deceive, how could believers distinguish between authentic and counterfeit spirituality? These questions made church leaders deeply uncomfortable. Some communities embraced the text as authentic prophecy, copying it carefully and studying its implication. Others viewed it as dangerous to church unity and authority, restricting its circulation and eventually allowing it to fade from popular awareness. The text survived in fragments and translations, preserved by monks and scholars who recognized its historical and theological significance, even when they disagreed with its contents. It remained hidden in monastery libraries, occasionally surfacing in mystical movements that valued direct revelation over institutional authority. But perhaps the most unsettling aspect of the Ascension of Isaiah is how relevant its warnings remain. The text's description of deception working through religious institutions, of spiritual authority being corrupted by subtle pride and ambition, of believers being led astray by those who use sacred language for unholy purposes. These themes resonate powerfully in our contemporary world. The prophecy raises profound questions about the nature of spiritual discernment. If Beliar's deceptions are so sophisticated that they can fool even the elect, how can authentic seekers of truth protect themselves? If the Antichrist will emerge not as an obvious enemy, but as a false friend of religion, what criteria can we use to distinguish between true and false spiritual authority? Isaiah's vision suggests that the answer lies not in institutional authority or external credentials, but in the development of inner spiritual discernment, the ability to perceive the true nature of spiritual realities, regardless of their outward appearance. The text implies that those who maintain their connection to the Beloved One through direct spiritual experience, rather than merely accepting second-hand teachings, were the ones who would ultimately recognize and resist Beliar's deceptions. Why was this vision forgotten? Perhaps because it demanded too much of its readers, too much spiritual maturity, too much willingness to question authority, too much courage to stand alone when necessary. The ascension of Isaiah called its readers to a level of spiritual responsibility that many found overwhelming. Yet, the text's preservation suggests that some recognized its enduring value. They understood that future generations might need these warnings, might benefit from Isaiah's cosmic perspective on the eternal struggle between truth and deception, between authentic spirituality and its counterfeits. The prophet's vision of the seven heavens ultimately offers both warning and hope. It warns of sophisticated deceptions that would challenge even the most spiritually mature believers. But it also reveals the ultimate triumph of divine truth, the resurrection of the faithful, and the establishment of a reality where deception becomes impossible. In our next exploration, we'll examine why the Antichrist in this ancient text differs so dramatically from modern Christian conceptions, and what these differences reveal about the evolution of apocalyptic thought throughout history. We'll discover how Isaiah's vision of Beliar as a spiritual deceiver rather than a political tyrant might offer insights into recognizing and resisting deception in our own time. The ascension of Isaiah challenges us to look beyond surface appearances, to develop the kind of spiritual discernment that can penetrate even the most sophisticated deceptions. It reminds us that the greatest threats to authentic spirituality often come not from obvious enemies, but from those who claim to be our spiritual guides. The prophet who climbed through seven heavens left us more than just a remarkable vision. He left us a roadmap for navigating the eternal tension between truth and deception, between authentic spiritual experience and its counterfeits. His journey reminds us that the path to ultimate truth requires not just faith, but the courage to question, the wisdom to discern, and the strength to stand for truth, even when we stand alone.